Make sure that we're on.
Mr. Stern, you want to have him spotlighted or wait for him?
I was going to wait.
Okay, that's fine.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to be beginning our Yom HaShoah program in just a moment. But I want to take a second to welcome everyone as you arrive and to invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat. Whether you're here on YouTube Live, whether you're on our Zoom, take a second to introduce yourselves in the chat and share where you're joining us from. We are thrilled to welcome you all to Or Hadash this morning to our Yom HaShoah commemoration. So Yom HaShoah is Holocaust Remembrance Day. There are multiple Holocaust Remembrance Days across our calendar. The secular day for Holocaust remembrance is actually on a different day from Yom HaShoah because the two were created at different times. Yom HaShoah created earlier as one of the spring holidays on the Jewish secular calendar, nestled between Passover and Shavuot, along with Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim, sort of these three Yoms: Holocaust Remembrance Day, Israeli Independence Day, and the day to celebrate the reunification of Jerusalem are these three modern holidays that sit on our calendar. And the first of the three that comes up is Yom HaShoah, just about a week after the end of Passover. And one of the things that I find so fascinating about the fact that this is the first of the three that comes up, because we rabbis so often, rather than looking for the historical reason, try to parse out the drash, the homiletical reason for such things. And for me, Passover is all about liberation, all about finding our way out of those narrow places, Mitzrayim, Egypt, but also Mitzrayim narrowness. And there is perhaps no more narrow or darker moment, darker time in Jewish history, and in fact, in modern human history, perhaps, than the Shoah, than the Holocaust, the systematic attempted genocide of the Jewish people, ethnic cleansing on the part of the Nazi Party, both against Jews, but also on Yom HaShoah and on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We also remember the gays and lesbians, the trade unionists, the Romani, those with disabilities who were also persecuted at the hands of the Nazis. And as we celebrate survival and liberation during this season, as we come out of Pesach, we also celebrate the rebirth and renewal of world Jewry that we have witnessed over these past decades, these past more than 70 years since the end of the Shoah. And here we are. We are here to share our stories and to be the next generation of those which share those stories. This morning, we are thrilled to welcome Pete Stearns to share his story as a survivor of the Holocaust, of the Shoah. And I want to, as I prepare to turn it over to our chair of our Holocaust Education Committee, Dan Schwartz, I want to share an image that I hope will sit with us throughout this morning, the image of a candle and a flame. The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic Judaism, teaches that out of every human being, there rises a light. And when that light meets another person and kindles that flame, that both candles lit by one another go out and glow brighter than the first one ever did. And so often I share this text at a wedding. in the context of two people falling in love and meeting one another and coming out of that love, sharing that brighter flame. But this morning, as we sit here and we join together in community across space, across time zones, across multiple platforms, our candles are each going to be lit by Pete Stern's story. When a flame lights another flame, unlike when we pour water from one glass to another, the candle that lit the flame is not half empty. Its flame is not diminished. It lights a whole new flame that burns just as brightly. And so as we learn today Pete's story, as we think about the pieces that resonate with us, the pieces that challenge us, the pieces that inspire us, we also think of our candle as being lit and think about what candles we will light as we continue to pass his story forward, as we walk in, bringing light into the dark spaces in our world, using our experience, our collective memory of the Holocaust as a powerful tool to build empathy, to build allyship with others who are oppressed, and as an opportunity to light that light of story, of love, of empathy, of reconciliation, and of liberation as we continue to pass our light forward from generation to generation. It is my pleasure and my honor to welcome everybody to Or Hadash this morning and to hand it over to Dan Schwartz, who is the chair of our Holocaust Education Committee, for a few minutes of introduction and to introduce our speaker this morning. Dan.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Ilana, and I also want to welcome all of you on behalf of our congregation and of our Holocaust Education Committee to this Yom HaShoah commemoration. We're all so glad that you're here with us today, and especially to Mr. Stern for taking your time, and to Haymack and Ruth Almy and Jeff Quinn, who have really been a huge support in creating this program and so many other programs that you'll hear about later today after Mr. Stern speaks. I wanted to just very briefly read President Joe Biden put out a proclamation this week. If you don't have a chance to read the whole thing, I recommend that you do that, but I'm going to read just a little bit of it. Mr. Biden wrote, "Those who survived the Holocaust are an inspiration to every single one of us, yet they continue to live with the unique mental and physical scars from the unconscionable trauma of the Holocaust, with many survivors in the United States living in poverty. When I served as vice president, I helped secure federal funding for grants to support Holocaust survivors, but we must do more to pursue justice and dignity for survivors and their heirs. We have a moral imperative to recognize the pain survivors carry, support them, and ensure that their memories and experiences of the Holocaust are neither denied nor distorted, and that the lessons for all humanity are never forgotten. Holocaust survivors and their descendants, and each child, grandchild, and great-grandchild of those who lost their lives, are living proof that love and hope will always triumph over murder and destruction. Every child and grandchild of a survivor is a testament to resilience and a living rebuke to those who sought to extinguish the future of the Jewish people and others who were targeted. Yom HaShoah reminds us not only of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust, but also reinforces our ongoing duty to counter all forms of dehumanizing bigotry directed against the LGBTQ, disability, and other marginalized communities. While hate may never be permanently defeated, it must always be confronted and condemned. When we recognize the fundamental human dignity of all people, we help to build a more just and peaceful world. In the memory of all those who were lost and in honor of all those who survived, we must continue to work toward a better, freer, and more just future for all mankind. That was our president. So now I want to introduce Mr. Stern. In reading briefly your biography, Mr. Stern, starting in Nuremberg, Germany, where you were born, and then once the Holocaust began, your experience with your family being deported to a holding camp in Latvia, and then transferred to the Riga ghetto. And we'll hear all about your experience there, and a work camp in Russia later on during the war, and then being hidden in Riga prison, and then your concentration camp experience in Ravensbrück, and then later in Bergen-Belsen. So just quite a history and story that we're about to hear from you. And thank you again so much to you and to HAMAC for being here today. And I now want to turn it over to you, Mr. Stern.
Good morning. My name is Peter Günther Stern, which is a Germanic name, considering that I was born in 1936, and in 1935, the Nazi Party passed some laws named after the town that I was born in, the Nuremberg laws. And among those laws, which are very much like the Jim Crow laws that were present in our country for longer than these laws were present in Germany, stated that all Jews born had to have Jewish names. So that meant girls had to be named Sarah, Ruth, Esther, boys, Abraham, Moses, Israel, Samuel. And Samuel is the name my kid brother got, who was born in 1939. The reason I was given a Germanic name and did not disobey the law, even though it was written, is that they didn't publicize the law, because the 1936 Olympics were coming up, and that would have been very bad publicity. So they did not publicize that aspect of the law until after those Olympics. They did, however, start to enforce other aspects of the law. Jews could no longer, if they were a doctor, work in a hospital. If they were a lawyer, they couldn't practice in front of the courts. Businesses were very restricted by who they could hire, or who they could hire to work in their homes. Jews could not teach in the public schools, and so on. And it got to the point that they could no longer run a business. So my father, who was an auto mechanic and electrician, lost his business. And he then went to teach in the Jewish school. He taught boys, possibly auto mechanics, but he definitely taught them shop skills. Should show a picture of my family with a picture that was taken about 1940, not 41. Obviously my mother, this is me, my father, and my younger brother. The reason I thought it was 1941, but I have a nephew who's a pediatrician, and he said his father did not look like a one-year-old in 1941, since he was born in 1939, and this is a picture of a 1-year-old. My father did this training so these boys might have a skill when they got to another country. Now, all the Jews of Nuremberg, and there weren't that many left, a few thousand, maybe 3, and they could no longer live in their homes. So all the Jews were designated to live in what were called Jew houses. This was not a ghetto. They were all over the city. And the house we lived in, which was near the railroad station, had been probably at the 1880s a mansion or a rich person's home, which had been subdivided. So there were about 4 or 5 families living there. And there was one communal kitchen, which served all the people in the house. We were there until 1941, November 1941. And at that point, the war had been going on since 1939. The war on the Eastern Front was obviously still going on, but had started in the fall of 1941 and had been, as far as the Germans were concerned, very successful. They had overrun countries of Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and so on. We should have the map just so people have some idea of what Europe looked like. And Nuremberg is, if you see Munich on the map over here, Nuremberg is above it, right on the Danube. And in the fall of 1941, a ruling came down that said 1,000 Jews from Bavaria, which is that southern part of Germany, were to be shipped out, and about 500 of them would come from Nuremberg. The shipment had 520 people from Nuremberg, of which at the end of the war, there were 17 survivors, which included my mother, brother, and myself. Other shipments that left Nuremberg at later times for other places, and we'll talk about those other places in just a little bit, had no survivors. We were put on a second-class train, which everybody had to pay for a ticket, and were shipped out to Riga area, which is up there. And there we were in a holding camp for about a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. You have to remember, at that point, I was 5.5 years old, maybe 5 3/4. That point in life, as in this point in life, those months are important. And time is a very fungible thing. But at any rate, we were in a holding camp for a while, and then we're transferred to the ghetto in Riga. Now, could we go to the next map? Okay, this is a map of all the concentration camps, not true, of many of the concentration camps that were run by the German government, or whatever you want to give responsibility to. And you can see that there are some with the red skull next to it. And these were camps which were killing camps. That was their function. All the other camps killed people as well. But in reality, this was not their main function. You will also see that there's some areas which have a black skull next to the name. And these were where there were large slaughters. Now, if you notice the one by Riga, there is something called Rumbula. And the day before that our train arrived, the Nazis cleared out much of the ghetto in Riga at a place called Rambula, which is a park outside of the city, and slaughtered about 20,000 people. This was still going on when we got there, because when we got to the ghetto, the house that we were in was at the edge. There was the wire fencing that I could see, and I could see truckloads of people being moved out of the ghetto, although I didn't know where they were going. I knew it wasn't to any place good, and I assume this was a continuation of that, because you don't kill 20,000+ people in a day. We were in the ghetto again for a fungible period of time, and then we were taken out of the ghetto, and this is my family, and we were put into a house which was seemingly, I would call now almost a small public housing project. And in that house, there were maybe 10, 15 other Jews. And my father would every morning, with some of his students who had also been transported out, go somewhere to fix German army vehicles. The people that were left in the house were put to another task. All those people that were killed, all their clothing, and in some cases, and I don't know if this is true of Rambula, before they were shot, they had to strip, was taken to this house and had to be sorted into men's clothing, women's clothing, all the divisions you can think of, and then shipped back to Germany. We were there for that fungible piece of time, and somewhere in the summer or fall of 1942, we were put into another facility in Latvia, in Riga, which was right next to where the cars were. And my family, we had a room where my mother cooked for all the boys. And I don't know where those boys stayed. Well, I don't remember, but I think it was also in that area. And this is where my father and they worked on the cars. If you look at the map, you can see the area that is pink. And this is, the edge of that is as far as the Germans got. So this is also where most of the cars were damaged. And if you look at where the red dot is now, this is where we were taken next. which was a farming area. And we lived in a farmhouse. If there were any guards there, I wasn't aware of it, although there were German soldiers there. But those German soldiers were basically combat soldiers, because at night there was gunfire because the partisans kept up pressure, or it may have been the Soviet army as well. I woke up once that I remember to that gunfire. My mother told us after the war that this was almost a nightly thing, but we, my brother and I, slept through it. As I said, I wasn't aware of any guards. The rule was, again, something I learned later, that if any of those boys tried to escape, we would be sacrificed. We would be shot. As I also said, the soldiers were there, and the soldiers used my brother and me basically as we were toys. We were there remembering of Germany. We were two kids who spoke German and probably reminded them of home. I remember being very disturbed when one of those soldiers got badly wounded, and it bothered me. At any rate, we were there for quite a while. I would say pretty much 6 to 8 months of 1943. During that time, my father and perhaps some of his boys were taken to a city closer to the border, where at one point an electrical facility had been damaged, and they were brought there to fix it. While there was an attack by the Soviet forces, and my father saved the life of a German officer. I don't know the man's name, but obviously it was a powerful individual. What happened after they came, my father and the people came back, the war had really turned, and it had turned much earlier than this. It had turned in 1942 when the Germans lost at the Battle of Stalingrad. And the reality was that Germany was no longer the conquering power. They were being pushed back. And since they were being pushed back, this workstation was abandoned. The boys were sent back to the concentration camp, which had now replaced the ghetto, a place called Kaiserwald. And most of them were killed or died. However, my family was taken to the men's civil prison in Riga, where we shared a cell on the second or third floor of this building. My mother never left the cell. My father, brother, and I would occasionally be allowed to walk in the exercise yard of the prison, just like any other prison movie you've ever seen. That was the yard we walked in. And we were there. As I said, my mother never left that cell. There had probably double prison that many of you can now appreciate of being incarcerated with two small children. We were there for approximately 3 months. And in the late fall of 1943, we were taken out of the cell. And this is the first time that I really saw my parents being scared. I am sure that they were scared many times before that, but this is the time that I was aware of it. And we're taken into another cell, which had names carved all over it into the green paint of that cell. And we were there for a day, a couple of hours, I have no idea. But when we were taken out of there, we were put on trucks, on a truck of a convoy of trucks. And these trucks were filled with clothing that was being shipped back to Germany. And we were on that truck and smuggled back into Germany. Every time we came to a border crossing or where they had soldiers guarding the road, we would have to bury ourselves underneath all that clothing until the soldiers said, okay, you can come out now. I don't know if we did most of the driving during the night or day, but I remember at night looking up at a beautiful sky, just driving from here all the way to what I think was around Berlin. When we got there, we were given up to the, I think, civil authorities. We were put in front of a judge, and I remember him yelling at us. And what was done was that my father was sent to Buchenwald, which was south of Berlin, over here. And this is where he died in May of that year. We, the remainder of the family, were sent to Ravensbrück, which was the only women's concentration camp. It was established in 1938 for all the deviants that were given at the beginning of this talk of people we should remember. There were also people such as some princesses from Norway, the sister of Mayor LaGuardia of New York. The women all wore striped dresses with different badges on there. You had the yellow one for Jews, red for political prisoner, pink triangle for homosexual, black, I believe, for criminal, purple for being a Roma or gypsy. And if you don't really know who the gypsies are, they are the forgotten people of the Holocaust. I believe they lost as many people as the Jews in proportion, not in number. This was also in Ravensbrück a place of medical experiments. They would take many prisoners and do all kinds of medical experiments on them. They would give them wounds and then try different types of medication to see their effectiveness. Many young women, young girls were sterilized so they could have no children in future. Some of the gypsies supposedly, this is what things that were told to me, not that I know, which were promised freedom if they volunteered for these experiments, but many people were experimented on without any permission. This Ravensbrück was also a place where towards the end of the war, they established a small gas chamber and crematorium. And it is estimated in different estimates that I've read, anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 people were killed in that gas chamber. As I said, all the concentration camps killed people. Now, the people here, as I mentioned, were all different types. At the beginning, this was a camp which had about 20% Jews, and the rest were all the other variants. And these people were used to work. Siemens, which is an electrical manufacturer of electrical equipment and is still around and has some very good equipment worldwide, had a factory attached to the camp. There were other factories that a lot of the women were used to make uniforms for the army. Some older women would be sitting around the camp when other women were out working, knitting socks for the army. My mother, I don't know if she worked in the factories, but I do remember her working in the fields, because I remember once she came back, she had smuggled some carrots into the camp, which obviously they must have been harvesting. We were there from, as I said, beginning of 1944 till 1945, February. In the meantime, the camp had been increased in size, or at least in numbers, because as the Germans were losing, they emptied the camps that were in the way of the Soviet onslaught and pushed people further and further west. And so the camp got to be more and more Jewish. As I said, February 1945. At that point, the Soviets were pushing at this door, and we were put onto cattle cars. Now, the way that they moved people from camp to camp was either by forced marches, which were death marches, because many of the people were killed on the way or just died on the way. Or they were put onto cattle cars and moved along. Now, we came from Ravensbrück to Bergen-Belsen, which isn't that great a distance, but it took a long time, I think about 3 days, because for quite often we would be just standing on the tracks or the side of the tracks. I don't know what the thing was, but it was crowded. It was hungry, thirsty. People died on there. And there was the stench of all that happening. And by the way, that's one of the things that any of the rescuers, American soldiers, English soldiers, any soldier who came and freed a concentration camp, the first thing that they talk about was an awareness of the place because of the odor. It's like nothing they had ever smelled before. We stank. We were taken from Ravensbrück, as I said, to Bergen-Belsen. And as bad as Ravensbrück had become, Bergen-Belsen was a lot worse. Not only were they getting people from the east, they were also getting people that were being emptied out of the west to get out of the way of the English and American soldiers who were freeing the camps in France and Belgium and the Netherlands. We got to Bergen-Belsen about 2 weeks after Anne Frank died. The place that we were put, these barracks were different than what I had seen in Ravensbrück. These were, in Ravensbrück, we were in sort of bunks filled with straw. In Bergen-Belsen, we slept on the floor. People were just put on the floor right next to each other. It got to the point where people, they no longer fed people. I remember scrounging for water. It was quite horrendous. However, in April 15th, the camp was freed by the British Army. Now, the day or days right afterwards, the soldiers took some of the children, and we were put part of a movie, and that movie was lost for many years and then was found and put on Frontline, the television program that still exists. And I watched it. I didn't see anything with it. So, but my wife and son, and I have 2 sons, looked at it again and said, this, the boy with the cap in front and my brother, who I'm holding on to, that's you. And I went to the Imperial War Museum, and they gave me some stills of this and showed me other footage that wasn't really part of the publicized movie. As you can see, the kids are of different health conditions, and this is because some of them came from the West, as I mentioned before, and some of us had been there longer, but at any rate, there we are. And I will show you another picture in just a little bit, but let's go back to that map. Okay, one of the camps that I did not talk about, but we'll talk about now, is a camp called Theresienstadt, which is right over here. It was in Czechoslovakia. And this was the show camp. This was a ghetto. And every time the International Red Cross said, we hear there are bad things going on, the Germans would open the camp to the International Red Cross, the only ghetto they ever opened up. And they had given out blankets and stuff to the people beforehand. And as soon as the Red Cross left, they took the blankets away and so on. But nonetheless, it was a ghetto which had better conditions than other places. I will talk about that just about next. But when we were freed, the camp had to be destroyed. They put people into mass graves, about 30,000, I believe, which hadn't been buried by the Germans or put into cremation. but typhoid fever was rampant, was going through the camp like mad. And in order to prevent a pandemic, they literally burned the camp to the ground and put all the freed prisoners into various different locations. We were put into what had been a training camp for German tank soldiers. And although we were living in the barracks, the kids, and there were many of those kids, as you could see, I would play within Tiger tanks and so on, just because they were there. But we were there from April through September. My mother had a breakdown. Health needed work. And it took that long for us to feel that we could go back to Nuremberg. And we went by truck back to Nuremberg, which is down there somewhere, but we can forget about that and go to Nuremberg. And the next one. And this picture is probably the most unusual pictures, one of the most unusual pictures of the entire Holocaust. These are survivors. And among these survivors, most of the survivors are people who, in just about all other situations, all other camps, were the first to be killed. Old, young, and this is, again, me and my brother, and people who were infirm. And many of those men, although you can't see it from here, were had one leg or a prosthetic for an arm. These were heroes of World War I, and they were put into Theresienstadt, this show camp. And that is the only reason that people of that age were able to survive the concentration camps. You can see my mother over here. And this is my stepfather, who didn't survive the camps. He survived the war because he had been deported from Germany. He was born in Nuremberg, or near Nuremberg. And he was deported because his parents came from Poland. And when Germany and Russia divided Poland, he ended up in the Russian sector. And when the Germans attacked the Russians, he ran as fast as he could deeper into Russia, and then enlisted in the Soviet army and fought his way back as a mine detector. He literally had a stick and sometimes a dog and walk in front of tanks to make sure that there would be no mines. And he fought his way back into Europe. He was wounded once by a mine, slight wound. In fact, he talks about the fact that he was so lucky that his most severe wound in the entire war was after the war, when he was playing soccer for his division. But at any rate, we were in this house, which had been an old person's home before the war. I remember that. It was near where we lived, and stayed there for about a year. Then we went to 2 different displacement camps. And in January 1947, came to New York. When we got to New York, put onto Ellis Island because there was a question about my health. But after a while, and this is questionable again, time, I thought it was about a week, and my stepfather told me no, it was more like 2 days. We were let go. My mother had two brothers who were here. One had come in 1933 at age 18, and the other one who escaped Germany in 1939, the day before war was declared. And he got into England that day, and since war was declared the next day, the English put him into a concentration camp and then transferred him to Canada in 1942, I believe. And then by 1943, he was released by the Canadians. By the way, for those of you who are interested in history, concentration camps were invented by the English during the Boer War. So there were things to spread around. Once we got to New York, I went with the uncle who had been here since 1933, and he lived in Florida. And getting to Florida was pretty traumatic for me. First time I had been separated from my brother and mother. And the only thing recognizable about Florida was the Shell gasoline sign, because the Shell symbol is the same throughout the world. It's a Dutch company. And the way Black Americans were treated. It was very familiar. I was not a happy camper. I was put into the 5th grade, but since it was in the wrong language and I had never been to school, I was then placed into the 2nd grade. I finished the school year from February to May and came back to New York. And that fall was placed in the 3rd grade. Halfway through, I was pushed into the 5th grade. At the end of 5th grade, I was skipped into the 7th grade. And as far as the official world was concerned, I had been caught up. I consider myself always behind the 8 ball in that sense. And I still don't think I caught up. At any rate, at the end of 8th grade, because I really had a problem paying attention and deficit in much of my knowledge, I was put into a vocational high school to learn a trade. And the trade I tried to learn was to be a refrigeration mechanic. And had I stayed in that, who knows how much money I could have made. But at any rate, at the end of high school, I went to junior college, which took me 2.5 years to finish a 2-year course, and graduated as a technician and worked for a year in the Navy Yard. And at the end of the year, I had gotten myself admitted to the University of Missouri School of Mines and Metallurgy, and went to school there and got to be a metallurgical engineer. After graduation, I worked for about 10 years doing that, and then decided to switch careers. And for the next 30 years, I worked as a science teacher, mostly in a middle school in Connecticut, where we lived, my wife and family, 2 boys, for 46 years. until I moved down here to Pennsylvania. I'm just about ready to take on any questions. And then I want to ask you a question. Hello, everybody.
Hey, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your testimony and your life story, or at least your early life story this morning. I have shared the link in the chat, both on Zoom and on YouTube, for people to submit questions. And we have a few questions coming in already. The first is from Jason Rothman, and he asks about that big family picture that you shared, that incredibly unusual photo that you have of all of the members of your family who survived because they were in Theresienstadt.
These were not family members.
Through these other stories. What?
These are not family members.
Oh, I see. Okay. He wanted to know how aware were the people in that picture of what was happening across German territory and at the other camps. I guess in the same way that the world was sort of sheltered from the larger horrors, how much were the people who were in Theresen also sheltered from the larger horrors?
To some degree, they all were, but there were, from that camp, there were many shipments to Auschwitz. So people were aware that there were other places that people were sent to. It may have been easier than other camps, but it wasn't a picnic.
Thank you. Let me see if there are other questions that have come in. Also, please do feel free to share questions in the chat. If you did not get a chance to submit them on YouTube earlier, sorry, not on YouTube, on through the Google form earlier.
I see a question in the chat. If I can
go
ask
ahead.
it, which is that did the Red Cross really believe things were as they seemed in the show camp? Did people at the camp ever speak up?
I don't know if they spoke up. I think denial is such a human condition that it's very easy to accept things that you don't want to believe, the things that may be true. The Germans, sometime in 1944, made a movie about how good life was in Theresienstadt. And they had an orchestra and everything else. And when they finished the movie, they couldn't show it. And they couldn't show it because if they showed it in Germany, the Germans would have all demanded to go to the concentration camp because the conditions in Germany had gotten to be so bad that it was an obvious fiction that this movie was presented as.
Yeah, and I can definitely back up what Mr. Stern says about that as a, from a historian perspective about Theresienstadt and the Red Cross. The Red Cross very much in their reports believed what the line the Germans were selling them about this sort of being a model displaced persons camp. They really went out of their way to make it look like everyone was fine here and no one was going hungry. That was not true, but it was a successful mirage.
Thank you. And Dan submits two questions. Did you know what your father did to save the soldier's life?
I did not. Nor do I know this soldier's name, except that this was a man who obviously had a lot of juice because he was able to get, I don't know how many soldiers to aid and abet a smuggling operation of smuggling Jews back into Germany. My mother told my brother and me, and this was much, much later, that while they were in that prison in Riga, they were offered forgiveness and would be granted freedom if they gave up my brother and me. They obviously did.
Oh. And also another question, if you could describe what it's like what it was like in the displaced persons camp following the war in the DP camps.
Well, I have limited memory of both of them. The one in Munich, I remember walking in and out of quite often. We went into Munich to see some vaudeville. So it wasn't truly a contained camp in terms of what I had been used to. And the one in Bremerhaven, most of us were always concerned about when was the boat leaving and so on. And by the way, the boat that we finally did go on was a boat called the Mary Marlin. And my brother and I both thought it was named I forget the name now, the name of a German song. And we didn't know who had the nerve to name the boat that, but it wasn't. It was a troop transport. And by the way, those soldiers did not have a good time being on a troop transport.
Yeah. Actually, on that topic of, I guess in your case, it was a misheard song lyric and a young child's sort of mishearing. But David Sekuler asks about the reconciliation of the physical beauty and ugliness of what, the worst of humanity. He asks, having traveled through Bavaria, he can say that it's some of the most beautiful landscape he's ever seen, and he wants to know if you've ever returned there, and wonders, can we ever reconcile how such evil was born in such a beautiful place?
My brother and I went back in 2011. The city of Nuremberg was commemorating the 70th anniversary of having kicked us out. So we came back for a commemoration of that. We didn't really get out of Nuremberg. That my brother had gone back prior to that time, 2 times before that. This was the only time I went back. How much time do we have left?
I would say we probably have about 5 or 6 more minutes for questions. And then we have another little part of the program.
Okay, in that case, I want to ask.
Well, actually, I have one more question for you then, submitted from Amanda. And I think it's a really good one, especially because we are such an intergenerational audience right now. Folks from 4th grade all the way up to, I don't know if there's anyone in their 90s here today, but we've definitely got 80s. She asks, as a parent of 2 young kids, one in elementary school, one in middle school, she says, it's different for me hearing stories such as yours now that I'm a parent, and wonders, what did your mother tell you about what you were experiencing while you were experiencing it? Sort of, what did your mother share with you during this time of trauma?
Well, both my parents and so on, everybody had a job to do. And my job was to watch my kid brother as much as I could to prevent him from getting into trouble. Every day was a question of survival. During the day in Ravensbrück, the women were out working, and there was a whole bunch of kids running around, pretty much unsupervised. It was sort of like Lord of the Flies without any rules. I assume all parents did this. Certainly my mother did. They assumed we knew more than we had any right to know. And in my writing, if you read it, to make the statement that we were adults before we were children. And I think this is one of the reasons I enjoyed working in middle school as much as I did. It allowed me to be the kid that I wanted to be. Okay, now my question is quite simple. And I would like to hear many different things, and I will not jump up and down and saying, yes, that's it. Is why do you think people like myself talk? What is it that we want from you?
Awesome. And so if you're with us on YouTube Live, just go ahead and type your answer into the chat. If you're with us on Zoom, you can use the raise hand icon, and I can even call on you to unmute and share your answer. Yeah, David Jones.
So I think the simplest answer is there are so many people that don't believe things that the Holocaust happened and don't believe that that many people were killed and think that these are just myths, but that's not okay, especially since there's so many people having lived it know that we need to make sure this never happens again so that other people don't suffer the same fate. So we need to know the stories and know what happened so we can make sure it doesn't happen again and nobody else has to live through the horrible things that you and other people have seen.
All right.
Awesome, thanks. Avi and Jim.
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yep.
Peter, thank you for your story. I'm going to make a guess that just to expand a little bit on what was just said, is that you want us to know what happened so that it doesn't happen again, but the it isn't just like another Holocaust of the Jews. The it that you don't want to have happen again is this kind of cruelty and injustice to anyone. And I heard your references to the experience of Blacks in America, and that's how I translate my Holocaust learning, is to look around and see what is it that's happening in the world to anyone today. Is that, I don't know, that's my guess.
Okay, I'm not answering till
okay.
everybody answers. Yeah.
Yeah, so I also want to share some responses that are coming in through the YouTube live chat. So the Marmians write, to share and educate future generations. Warren and Shelley write, never happen again. And the Carls write, to remember, honor, and prevent such atrocities in the future. And they say, thank you for your story. Other responses? Adam Coopersmith.
I would guess that it's to make sure that the personal stories keep getting embedded in the facts and the figures that are taught in the history lessons.
Nice. Oh, and so here in the chat, Kaya also, who's another one of our sixth graders, writes, because it's important that this never happens again. So we need to tell and retell these stories to prevent this from ever happening again.
All right.
Yeah, again, with the power of the personal story, that we don't lose sight of the people in the midst of learning something as history, that this isn't history, this is our lives, our legacy, our community, people we know and love and meet and shop next to at Acme, and you know, that we are just, you know, one wrong turn away from the possibility of ending up here again. This is not a hypothetical. This is something that has really happened and could truly happen again.
All right, let me give you what I want. And it's in the phrase, and I've heard this from just about everybody who spoke, the fear that history will repeat itself. Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Ken Burns, who is a filmmaker historian, has said that history does not repeat itself, but human nature never changes.
Mm.
I would like to say that he may be right 99% of the time. But as a teacher, I feel that if I can get to that 1% or to that one person, I will have prevented something from happening. But the question then becomes, what do I want from that individual, from you? I don't want you to become a passive learner. To learn something like this is very easy. What do I want you to do? And this is the question that has to be answered. And by the way, people who answer it best or fastest in all the talks that I've given are the younger children. What is it that you need to do to prevent this from happening again?
Nice. And is that a question that you want to invite people to answer right now?
If they can,
All
they
right.
have to answer that.
Yeah, I have a hand.
Let me just give you
Oh, sorry, yeah.
little more of a clue. I don't know how many of you know of Walt Kelly, Philadelphia boy. And he created a cartoon called Pogo. And Pogo took on the good fight, and he fought Joseph McCarthy. And he also fought for the environment. And he created, in this cartoon, a picture of him coming out of a swamp and making the following statement. Can we have that cartoon? And that's what you have to remember when you're answering that question. What can you do?
Wow.
Anybody?
Awesome. Yeah. So we have some hands. I see Adeline, and then David, and then Ben. And then I have some in the chat as well. So Adeline, you'll have to unmute yourself, or maybe I can unmute you. There you go.
Maybe you can share the stories you've learned and tell people what happened if they don't know, and that might help like to prevent it happening again if they know like the like how tragic it was.
All right.
Nice.
Somebody else?
David.
I don't give that. My style of teaching is you have to come up with the answers.
Yeah, David, and then Ben.
So a few things. So the first one is, I just think that there's a conflict in everyone. Like no one's all good or all bad. And I know so many people have said that before, but I think everyone just needs to stress the point that we all have the power to do horrible things and amazing things. It's just what you choose to tap into. So we need to work on focusing on the brighter side, not giving in too hard when it is hard. I also just wanted to say, you really appreciate the smaller moments after learning about these things and what could have made a big difference. You just think so much more about your decisions. Because I was learning about the Holocaust in class, and Hitler wanted to be a painter before he wanted to kill all the Jews. He wanted to be a painter, and he wasn't allowed into art school. And just thinking about that one small decision of the guy that might have been on the board there, if they had let him in, things might not have happened. And just thinking about those small things that could make such a big difference, it really has an effect on you.
Thank you. Ben, and then I have a reflection from Amy in the chat on YouTube, and then a couple more from here on Zoom.
When something like bad happens, or something is like bad, or like kind of like what happened, or you see that it might happen, don't like stay there trying to protect yourself from what will happen and not do anything, and just stay silent and hold yourself up. You have to speak up about it and understand that like there may be consequences for you. What could happen without you doing that is much more worse.
Nice. Thanks, Ben. And so Amy on YouTube writes, and Amy happens to also be a member of our Holocaust Education Committee. And so thank you all who are on the Holocaust Education Committee for all of your hard work today. She says, speak up, vote, demonstrate for human rights and against movements of hate. And in the chat on Zoom, Kaya writes, when we see someone being cruel to other people, to step in and try to stop it. Shira writes, to stand up for what is right, no matter what. And both Maura Carolyn wrote to speak out. Maura Adam wrote to be an upstander.
I think those are excellent, excellent answers. Sort of like to end with something that Martin Luther King Jr. said. He said, in the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but we will remember the silence of our friends. We can't be silent. And certainly what you young people have said gives me hope that silence is not going to be part of the future.
Thank you so, so much, Mr. Stern, for speaking with all of us today across all of our ages and stages. I want to turn it over for a moment to Maura Barbara, the education director at Or Hadash and the director of our Smile School, to light the Holocaust Memorial candles and to perhaps kindle that flame of memory for us and inspire us as we consider what piece of this story we each commit to carrying on. I love that last question you asked. I had actually prepared to invite people to write a response about, being the candle and what piece of this morning they are committing to each carry forward, whether it's a piece of your story or being an upstander or something like that. But I think that the way that you brought us to speech and to reflection together and really built it out of community does that better than we ever could have in writing. And so thank you so much for both sharing your story and, as Dan just wrote, for helping to facilitate this incredible discussion. And so it's my pleasure and my honor to turn it over for a moment to Barbara Weissman, our Director of Education at Or Hadash. More, Barbara. You might be muted. There you go.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
You're good.
So much, Rabbi Alana. And Mr. Stern, thank you so much for sharing your testimony with us this morning. At Or Hadash, and specifically in our religious school, we are committed to Holocaust education. We teach our students that it is their responsibility to bear witness to the testimonies of the Shoah. At Or Hadash, we're committed to teach and to do in order to ensure that the world never forgets. Our students learn that it is a crucial part of their heritage as Jews to repeat these testimonies and pass them along with our other sacred Jewish teachings. Our Holocaust Education Committee, chaired by Dr. Dan Schwartz, together with the Education Steering Committee, exists as a collective unified force to teach our students about the Shoah and to recognize hatred and injustice in our world. We teach our children to speak out and to act in order to protect the vulnerable in the hope that the horrors of the Shoah will not be repeated again. In doing so, we honor the memory of the 6 million Jewish souls who were murdered at the time of the Shoah. May their memories be for a blessing as we all pledge to never forget. This morning, I light these 6 Yortzeit candles to honor the blessed memory of the 6 million Jewish souls murdered by the Nazis during the Shoah. These candles come to us from a project of Maccabi Great Britain and were graciously given to us by retired Executive Director of Maccabi USA and Or Hadash member Jed Margolis. Each candle represents a life lost to hatred during the Shoah. These candles honored the blessed memory of Neni Lazar, Libby Kleinman, Chaim Bornstein, Yitzhak Erster, all of Poland, and Ada Tedeschi of Italy and Bronya Lerman of the USSR. We hold these people in our hearts as we remember them and all the other victims of the Shoah today. We pledge to fight anti-Semitism, racism, hatred, bigotry, as we honor their blessed memories. And Mr. Stern, I assure you, we will not be silent.
Thank you so much, Maura Barbara, for that, and to our Or Hadash Makela, our choir, for lending us your beautiful voices in that newly recorded rendition this year, actually this past month, of Eli Eli. I see a hand from David Jones, in case there's one more question before we hand it over to Ruth from Hammock, who is our incredible co-sponsor of this morning's program, to share a couple of words about that organization and a couple of words about Holocaust Memorial Memory and Education in Philadelphia. David, you have a hand up.
I just wanted to say that on Friday, so we're learning about the Holocaust right now in ELA, and on Friday,
English language arts. Keep going. Just
and
for those who are not in middle school who are here.
yeah, they changed all the names of all the classes.
Seriously.
And so on Friday, we actually got on a Zoom call with a Holocaust survivor, our class did, and listened to their story for most of the day. So I just thought it might be helpful to know that so many other people are contributing too.
Wonderful.
It just makes me smile to know that there's other people that care. My teacher was crying at the end.
Thanks, David. Thank you so much. And what school do you go to?
Sandy Run. I'm still
Sandy
getting
Run.
used to saying that.
Nice. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Ruth from Hammock.
Yes, actually, that was a little bit of a good segue for us, because I think that might have been one of our programs. So we are the Holocaust Awareness Museum and Education Center, recently relocated to Elkins Park. We're now based out of Kennesaw, Israel. We do school programming with Holocaust survivor speakers, including people like Mr. Stern, who spoke to you today. He also speaks to a lot of schools for us. We were founded by a Holocaust survivor named Jaco Briz in 1961. So to the best of our knowledge, we are the oldest Holocaust museum in the United States. Some recent programming we have done that you might find interesting is we have recently been collaborating internationally with a group based in Perth, Australia, called the We Are Here Foundation, to do international Holocaust remembrance and speaker education videos. What they focus on is the singing of the Partisan Song, which is a song of hope and resistance during the Holocaust by the Partisans, who were a Jewish group who fought against the Nazis. So I'm going to link to everyone in the Zoom chat a video we recently put out with them for Yom HaShoah, for International Holocaust Remembrance Day. That should be that. And also, I know that unfortunately we still, things are moving ahead with the pandemic. We see the light at the end of the tunnel. We are still not open for visitors at our physical location at the museum itself. However, we do have a virtual experience if you would like to learn more and see more of what we have to offer. We have a virtual tour that I'm also going to link. It includes photographs of artifacts we have in our museum, as well as videos of other survivors that are linked to those artifacts. Some are that person's personal thing, and you can hear them talking about it. I think it's a really interesting experience. So that also is a link I've provided for you in the chat there. If anyone would like to email our organization, if you have any questions about what we do, or if you have a local organization that would like to take a virtual tour of the exhibit run by one of us as a docent, you can email us at info@hamec.org, which I have now also put it in the chat. So thank you very much for having us, and Mr. Stern, and thank you again, Pete, for stepping in and doing this. I think it was a wonderful presentation.
Rabbi, you're on mute.
You know, it only works if I unmute for people to hear me. So thank you so much, Ruth, and thank you so much to everyone at Hammock for partnering with us at Or Hadash again this year for our Yom HaShoah program and commemoration. And I know that the people on Zoom can't see the people on YouTube, and the people on YouTube can't see the people on Zoom, but I can say that that between the two platforms, we gathered at least 50 screens strong, so probably about 75 or 80 people here this morning together. And what a real joy and blessing it is to be able to be here together this morning. yes, we all cannot wait for the time when we are joining back together in the sanctuary or in the community room or even out on our front lawn or our front porch together to listen together to speakers and to join in discussion where we can hear all of each other's voices and see all of each other's faces. But to know that there is something so beautiful in about 75 or 80 of us from across the area, perhaps outside of Philadelphia as well, and across the entire lifespan of folks here at Or Hadash, gathering together at every age and stage to bear witness, to bring our memory, and to bring that light forward into the next generation and also into the next struggle for oppression and equality, and seeing the humanity and the possibility and the promise of everyone. And so it is with that that we close this morning, not with a song of memory or a song of memorial, but with a song of hope and peace. Oseh Shalom, again sung by our Makela, our choir at Or Hadash. Oseh Shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel. May the one who makes peace in the high places allow that peace to be brought down by the work of all of our hands on earth for us, for our whole community, and for all who dwell on earth.
Oseh shalom, shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu. Oseh shalom, shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru amen. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Amen, amen, amen. Oseh shalom, shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu. Oseh shalom, shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru amen. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Amen, 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 amen.
Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today.